Renee Bukavi here. I just kind of wanted to go over today how to get started with the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. And mainly I just want to go ahead and take a couple of the examples one step further and show you how to modularize your application a little bit more. If you're not familiar with the API for JavaScript, you can go to developers.arcgis.com, and this will take you to a ton of information for developing with the ArcGIS APIs and the SDKs. But at this point, you can just go ahead and click on the JavaScript link, and this is going to take you to a ton of information on using the API, samples, tutorials, the API reference, which you should always be looking at. And it does a really good job of showing you how to get started using the API and how to build out a couple of basic applications. But one thing I have noticed, and I've gotten some feedback from others, is that it really doesn't show you how to modularize your application too much. I mean, it does a great job showing you how to get more familiar with a lot of the tools that it has, but it does so by just putting everything into a single HTML file. And far too often I've seen people start their applications this way and continue building their applications this way until they reach a point where they realize that it's getting a little bit too unwieldy and you have to kind of break it out a bit more. And that's when you really have to get more familiar with how to modularize your apps. So I just kind of want to go over quickly how you might do that today. So I'll show you really the quick structure I have here, and I'm going to keep it basic. I'm just going to have an index.html file, a JavaScript folder, and a CSS folder. So first, let's look at the index.html file. And here you can see we just have a link to the Esri CSS file. We have a link to our own CSS file. We have a div for the map called mapDiv, and we have a reference to the API, and we have a reference to a run.js file. So why don't we go ahead and look at the run.js file first. And the run.js file, you can see that we go ahead and we define a bit of configuration for the application. One thing you need to remember is that the API is built on top of Dojo. So these are all kind of Dojo standards and ways of doing things. So we have these packages here, and the way the packages work is that when I go ahead and call a module, I'm going to reference it as controllers, and by doing so, I need to let it know that it's inside the JS folder and it's pointing to that controllers folder there. So it's really just kind of aliasing where these paths are at. This location path that you see up here, it takes a regular expression and adjust the path name so that it'll try and find these folders on the local host or wherever you have your web application hosted. And the only reason you have to do this is because the API is being served through a CDN, a content delivery network. If it weren't being served that way, you wouldn't really need to do this, but since it is, that's one of the things that you have to do for this application here. Now you may notice down here that we're defining a path for a called app, and we're saying that's just in the JavaScript folder. And at the very end of this, we'll go ahead and we have a little array here, and we're calling the application itself in the string right here. By default, this is going to look for a file in the JS directory called main.js. So that's what main.js is here. Now inside main.js, you have a very familiar require function, and this require function is what you'll typically see inside a lot of the sample code. And that's because the require needs to be in your application at some point. Well, it's the first thing you need to see, and it's kind of if you've worked with Java or C++ or C#, a main method. So that's what this initial require does. It kind of bootstraps the entire application to get everything started. And what we're doing here is we're going to reference a file called map controller in the folder controllers, a file called map services in the services folder, and we call this dojo DOM ready. What dojo DOM ready does is essentially what it says. It's going to wait until everything in the DOM has been loaded and then start the process of initializing the code that's inside this file. If you'll notice, there is no .js extensions to any of these paths, and that is because the API, which uses the Dojo loader, is going to know to look for those files with the extensions. So there's no need for you to do that. Then we're going to go ahead and give the name to the map controller. We're going to call it map_ctrl, and then we have a map services. I could call this Bob, and I could call this Mary. It doesn't really matter what I reference them as long as I stay consistent and I maintain the order. That's always very important. So then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new controller. I'm going to pass it an object in here, and that object is going to have an element. It's going to have this map options, and in the map options we're going to have a base map. We call it as gray, center, which are just some XY coordinates that's going to center the map, and these XY coordinates have to be in a lat long geographic coordinates. That's how the map reads them. So if you're working a different coordinate system, you don't want to put those in here in the center value. And we have a zoom level of 12, so we're going to try and zoom into the 12th level of the tile layers that are going to be loaded here. We're also going to go ahead and pass in a layers property, and with that layers property is going to use the map services load services method to load that in. We'll take a look at that in a second. And once all that is done, we're going to call load method from the controller, and that load method returns another method called then, and inside that then method we have a little function. We're just going to go ahead and write out to the console in the browser that says map ready. So what that means is that anytime you see a then after a method, you know that you're returning a promise. And we're not going to get too much into promises right now, but all I'll tell you at the moment, if you're not familiar with it, is that promises are used whenever you have to wait for something to happen, such as make a request to a web service or wait for some information to get downloaded from another location, and it's not going to happen right away. That's what a promise is. Basically, it's going to promise you it will return some information, or it will return an error. So first thing we'll do, let's take a look at this map controller, which is in our controllers folder here. And in the controllers folder, we've got another module, but this time using the define method. And with this define method, you can see that we're going to go and reference a dojo underscore base declare module, dojo on module, dojo deferred, Esri map, and then digit widget base. So declare is used with Dojo to kind of, it's kind of a way that Dojo creates classes, makes it a little easier for you to build these particular modules. And the on method is how Dojo handles events. It's a great little tool that you can use to listen for events and to emit events. Dojo deferred handles the promises that we talked about before. So it does just like it says. It's going to defer some action until it's done and then return those results. And there's also the Esri map. That is going to be the map object itself that is shown in the browser. So that is the actual map that we're going to see our streets and everything else loaded on. And then this widget base here. The widget base that comes out of the digit library. That is, just like it says, is the base module for most widgets, I should say, or all widgets used within Dojo itself. And you don't really need it in this case. We're not doing anything that really probably justifies it. However, I like to use widget base in most of my modules anyway, because you get some nice functionality with them, such as it will automatically merge any method objects that you might pass in, like options. It's going to go ahead and mix in those options with the object itself, and it's also going to go ahead and give you access to a couple of getter and setter methods that you can use. So I kind of like to use it whenever I make any module that I find it's going to come in handy. And so I return this declare with the widget base. I'm creating a new class essentially. It's not really a class, but we'll call it that. And in there, we're going to define a couple of one method. So we have a load method. And what this load method is going to do is that we're going to go ahead and create this deferred object here at first. So we create a new deferred. And before we go over the rest of this, first thing we're going to do is we're going to say return a deferred.promise. So again, here's where that promise comes in. We're going to go ahead and we're going to tell it that when you call this load method, any other module that refers to that load method, we're going to make a promise to that module that we're going to return something. We'll either return a result or we're going to return an error. But we will return something at some point. That's a promise. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the actual map. So we define a map and we're going to pass it the element that we passed in as part of our options, and this is going to be just basically the name of the div in the index.html file that the map is going to hold the map, which is called map-div. And then we're also going to pass in our options that we defined in the earlier, and that is called map options. And we use this .get map options, and like I said, we get a couple of nice getter setter methods in here. And you don't really need to use these. I, however, like to refer to them and use them when I can. And we're also going to use this on method. We're going to use on.once. Now, this is kind of neat because this says here is that just as advertised, it's only going to listen for this method once. And once it happens a single time, it'll never fire again. So that's kind of a neat way to use the Dojo on module. And it has a couple other really cool methods in there as well that we may cover at a later point. So what we're going to want to do is listen for the map to fire a layers-add result event. And when it fires that event, it's going to go ahead and return some layers. These are the layers that have been added to the map. And we're going to go ahead and grab our deferred here, and we're going to resolve that deferred. And when we say resolve, that means, you know, we made a promise to you that we're going to return something. So we're going to resolve that promise with a map object, which is the map that we went ahead and added these layers to. And down here, after the on.once is defined, we're going to say map.addLayers and then say this.getLayers. So these were the layers that we passed in with our object earlier, and we're going to go and add them to the map. And once that's all done, we'll go ahead and set the map for the map controller equal to the map that we created up here. And again, after everything is said and done, we're going to return the promise to let the any other modules that want to use this controller know that we're going to return some sort of result. So let's take a look at the services that are in here. This services folder has a map service.js file, and in this file we create another module where we're going to go and bring in a feature layer module, a simple renderer module, and this utils symbol util module that we'll go over in a second. So this module is going to have a function defined called load services, and in this load services it takes this config here, which actually I don't think I'm actually passing that, so let's go ahead and we can remove that. And we're going to go ahead and create an array, an empty array in this case, called layers. And after we do that, we're going to create a new feature layer called census layer, and this is just going to bring in a ArcGIS service that's a feature layer of census data. And we're going to create a new simple renderer that's going to use the symbol util module to bring the symbology in. And what a simple renderer will let you do with a feature layer is that, say the feature layer is defined where the census tracts are all blue and they have a white boundary. You don't have to display them that way on the map. You can use a simple renderer to go ahead and define the symbology so that the census tracts will all be transparent and they will have really thick purple outlines. It's up to you how you want to define that. It's kind of a neat way of getting around whatever the default settings are for the map. And once we have that already, we can go ahead and grab our census layer, feature layer, and set the renderer to the renderer that we defined up here. So that's how you do that. And we're going to go ahead and add that census layer to the layers array. So we push it back in the array, and then we're going to return that array of layers. And for the whole module itself, we're going to return an object that just has the method of load services attached to it. And that's pretty much it for the map services module. Now let's go to the utils module here. And in this utils module, this one goes ahead and defines another module that's going to bring in the Esri color, which is basically just extends the Dojo base color module, and it adds a few methods that I believe they use for some internal stuff. We're going to bring in the simple fill symbol and simple line symbol. And what this does is we return a object with a method called render symbol attached to it, and in that method it's going to return a simple fill symbol, which basically is what that means is that it is a symbology that is really going to be just a basic fill. It could be a solid. It's going to be a solid fill of a single color, and you can define whether or not that color's transparency is 50%, 30%, or 100% or nothing. Then what you can also do is you define the outline for that fill. In this case, it's going to be called it's going to be solid. So that's what the style solid does. You can have a dashed lines. There's a couple other options in there as well. Now for the outline of the symbol, you can also define that to have it's going to be a simple line symbol, and that simple line symbol, I'm sorry, the simple fill symbol is going to be a solid fill, so it's not going to be hashed, it's not going to be anything odd or picture or anything like that in the fill. It's just a basic solid fill. And then we're going to have this simple line symbol, which is going to be a solid line. You can also define it to be dashed, and I believe there's a couple of other options for that as well. And they define a new color for it. And in this case, just going to define a new color. You pass in RGB, so 255, 255, 255 is going to be white. So it's going to be a white line. You can adjust this to be any color you want. And it's going to be 1 pixel thick. That's what the 1 means here. And then we pass in the color of the fill. So we create another new color, 128, 128, 128. That is kind of a darkish gray color. And it's going to have a transparency of 50%, so 0.5. So that's what the fill of the polygon is going to look like. So again, this returns this main.js file here, and you can see that we are using the map services to load layers, and we come to controllers. We're using the map controller to go ahead and bring in, define a new map, add the layers, and return the promise. And at this point, go ahead and look at what that actually is going to look like in the browser. So I'll go ahead and bring in a browser right here. Let's refresh the page just so you can see everything come up. And you can see there, here's our map ready in the console here. And that's from right here. And just as we described earlier for the symbology for the feature there, we got some white outlines for the census tracts, and we have a transparent fill for each of them that is kind of a grayish color in the fill. So this is by no means how you have to break out your application into different modules. You don't have to necessarily follow this folder structure of controllers, services, and utils. Typically, you may have just a folder of widgets, and you may actually use your main.js file to do all of the actions that a controller might. You might even have it have your map in there defined. You don't necessarily need a services folder. I use this services module just as kind of a helper for this demo. I would normally bring in my services from some sort of a configuration of some sort, and building an application based on configuration files is something that we'll cover at a later time. But for today, I just wanted to go over how to build out your application in a more modular fashion than you might be used to if you're just getting started. If you've been using the API for a while, this is probably all very basic stuff for you. But again, if you're brand new, this is probably more of what you're going to be doing when you build an application that you expect to really grow or make it easier to maintain. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, check out the notes for this video. Contact me, let me know. Thank you very much.